Here's an example in which we are multiplying two imaginary numbers. Let me bring it down here where we can see it a little bit better. So we have negative 11i multiplied by 2i. Well, how do you do that? Well, just like you would x's. Negative 11 times 2 is negative 22. And I times I is I squared. So that makes sense, right? No big surprise there. But here comes the new part, though. We can't leave it that way. Why not? Well, it turns out I squared is a special deal. How? Let me show you what it is. So you know where the I comes from. Like if I have the square root of like negative 9, you know the negative comes to the front as an I, and then the square root of 9 is 3. So it's just 3i. Right? And if you have like the square root of negative 4, same thing, negative comes to the front as an I, right? We always take the negative to the front as an I. Then the square root of 4 is 2, so it's 2i. Okay, well, what's the square root of negative 1? Same deal, right? Negative comes to the front as an I. It's I. Square root of 1, what's the square root of 1? It's just 1. That's just 1i, or just I. Ah. So now we know what I is. What is I? Square root of negative 1. So, let's follow the logical train here. So, I, or 1i, is the square root of negative 1. You agree? The negative just comes out as an I, and then the square root of 1 is just 1. Okay, great. So what? That's what 1i is. Right. We want to know what's I squared. So how can we figure out what I squared is? Well, let's just take this and square both sides, right? Because 1i squared is just I squared. I mean, 1i squared if you want, but the 1's not doing anything. I squared, and what is the other side? Well, what have we learned about roots and second powers? What do? They cancel each other out, don't they? Let me do that in a different color to make it more clear. They cancel, and so it's negative 1. Do you see what happened there? Right? You know that. You know that square roots and second powers are opposite, right? You know, like what's the square root of x squared? Well, they cancel each other out, and it's just x. Right? A root and a 2 power are the opposites. So same thing right here. The root and the 2 power cancel each other out. So I squared is negative 1. Okay, so that's the big deal right there. Let me put a but. It's not. That's something we need to always be aware of, is that is the case. Let me make a little better box. There we go. So and let me even highlight. I want to really make this a big deal. I squared is negative 1. So whenever you see I squared, any place, any time, you go, oh, I don't leave it as I squared. It's negative 1. Regular i's we just leave as a regular I, but I squared, we say, oh, that's just negative 1. See how this I squared has become negative 1? Okay, so what? So now that means this equals negative 22 times negative 1, positive 22. And that's the answer to the problem. Positive 22, even though it started out negative. How'd that happen? Well, we got an I squared, and what is I squared? It's negative 1. Plain, normal negative 1 with no i's at all. Right? Kind of weird, huh? And so I squared becomes negative 1, and then negative 22 times negative 1 is positive 22.